Alright guys, welcome back to another video on the super duper world of sports. And this is week 5 top 3 fantasy performances from week 5. And this is full PPR leagues, by the way. So let's get into it, starting with the quarterbacks. And we have Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills, who had 35.16 fantasy points. An outstanding performance against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 2 deep touchdowns to Gabe Davis, including one tied for the longest in Bills history, 98-yard touchdown to Gabe Davis. Number 2, Patrick Mahomes dominated on Monday Night Football, put up 30.48, almost 30.5 fantasy points, and he should be a no-brainer starter. There's a difference between that. No-brainer starter in the future as well. Number 3, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles, not a surprise. 27.66 fantasy points, used his rushing ability again. Had no passing touchdowns, but had 2 rushing touchdowns. So that's what boosted his fantasy value there. And fantasy running backs, we had a tie for first place. And Austin Eckler of the Chargers and Leonard Fournette of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers both had 35.9 fantasy points. Fournette was against the Falcons and Eckler was against the Browns. But nonetheless, both had outstanding performances nonetheless. Number 3, Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders had 30.3 fantasy points. We thought the Broncos were bad against him. Hey, look at the Chiefs. Let up just 4 less points. Still over 30 points. And now he's the number 4 ranked running back in the entire league after a slow start. And number 4, that should say, Breece Hall of the New York Jets clearly has overtaken Michael Carter as a starter. Michael Carter, clearly, he's not the starter anymore, but he's going to continue to chip into Hall's workload. So Hall won't be like a complete workhorse yet, but he will be in the future. That's my prediction. Fantasy wide receivers, number 1, Gabriel Davis of the Buffalo Bills had 32.1 fantasy points, headlined by 98 and 62-yard touchdowns. Remarkable. I mean, it's hard in itself to get, like a touchdown above 60 to 70 yards. Man got a 98-yard touchdown. That's ridiculous. And yeah, that's enough to put him in the top of the wide receivers this week. Number 2 was Justin Jefferson. Not a surprise. 30.32 fantasy points. And he was, as usual, serving as the top target for Kirk Cousins. And tied for 3rd, we have another tie. This is the first week where we have a tie for running backs and or wide receivers. But tied at 3, Devontae Adams of the Vegas Raiders and Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks both put up 27.4 fantasy points. Adams was on Monday Night Football against the Chiefs, and Lockett was against the Saints in a unfortunate losing effort for both. Both teams came very close to winning, though, and valiant efforts by both players. Fantasy tight ends are next. Number 1 was Taysom Hill of the New Orleans Saints. What a game by him, man. What a game. Had 34.08 fantasy points. And, I don't know whether to trust him in the future as a starting tight end every single week. But he's like a boom or bust option, definitely. Number 2, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. Zero surprise there, even with number 3, Mark Andrews. But yeah, Kelce put up 33.5 fantasy points, and Andrews put up 22.9, about 23. Both of them are also no-brainers at their respective positions to start. Fantasy kickers are next, and number 1 is Nick Folk of the New England Patriots, 17 fantasy points, 26-0 against the Lions. Of course, that was their win. Huge game for Bailey Zappi, and Nick Folk took advantage of their inability. The offense's inability to punch in the ball many times, so beneficial for him. Number 2, on Thursday Night Football last week against the Denver Broncos, Chase McLaughlin had a huge game, 16 fantasy points. He scored all of the points for the Colts there. He had He had two 50-yarders and two non-50-yarders. So that's that. And tied for third, another tie we have here. Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders and Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens, the latter being obviously the greatest of all time. Both had 15 fantasy points, and both had plenty of opportunities to capitalize on their offenses. Great, great explosiveness. Fantasy DSTs, defense special teams. At number 1, we had the New England Patriots defense, who had 22 fantasy points in a shutout of the Detroit Lions. Number 2, Dallas Cowboys, just behind them at 21 fantasy points in a very good win for them against the Rams. And number 3, San Francisco 49ers, easy 15 points against the Carolina Panthers. Not a surprise that they got so many points on defense. And that is it for this week's top fantasy performances from each position. Top 3 fantasy performances from each position, that is. San Francisco 49ers closing it out at 15. All of these are quite reliable options. And yeah, good luck in your fantasy endeavors, and see you in the next